Hi folks, how are you? Did you survive the opposition proceedings? That was quite complicated, right? But not as complicated as cancellation proceedings. They are much broader in their application, but less frequent. So I want you to take the most profit out of the course and only focus on the proceedings and on the concepts which are more likely to be confronted within your practice. And as cancellation proceedings are less frequent, much less frequent in EU IPO proceedings, so I will cover it not in very much detail. If I want to go into details, I have probably to make an own course out of it. So it's not an easy. But I want to focus on two new concepts. I want to introduce you to two new concepts, and the cancellation proceedings give me the perfect pretext for doing so. And we may go into one case, interesting case on bad faith. Now, I want to talk first about the non-use or the use of the trademark within European Union. So you know that the use of the trademark is not something which is to be proven at the filing, right? I didn't mention it. So it is not like the US where you have to promise, so to say, that you're using your trademark. That is not the case in Europe. So, but still, the rationale of the trademark law is that the consumers are not confused, and the consumers are confused or not confused if you use the trademark on the marketplace. Otherwise, you would not encounter the consumers, right? So we do not want to protect the trademark in abstract, just to satisfy the trademark owner. No, that is not the reason. That would conduct us to a situation where we have a cluster of trademarks on the register, which would block all possible trademarks for newcomers to the market who also want to use trademarks on the marketplace. Now, therefore, we have Article 58(1)(a), which says that, here it is, which says that you have to use your trademark within 5 years from, so to say, the application. Now, this is not only 5 years from the application. It is, in fact, from the actual date where you receive a cancellation request 5 years back. So it may be even 10 years from the registration, but you have to go back from the cancellation request. Now, that is not only for cancellation. The use is not only important for cancellation, and is also useful and mandatory for the opposition proceedings, and I will tell you why. In opposition proceedings, the defendant has one weapon, so to say, against the opponent, which is about the use of the earlier trademark. Now, if the earlier trademark has not been used previous to the 5 years before the opposition notice was issued, then it cannot be used against the trademark owner, so to say. It is out of the equation with regard to the opposition proceedings. Now, there must first be a request from the defendant that the opponent has to prove the use of the earlier mark, but it must be a mark which is sufficiently senior in order to comply with a 5 years period, right? It cannot be an opposition mark which has been registered a year ago. That would not be possible. So for the first 5 years, you have a grace period. You don't need to prove the use of the mark on the marketplace. But then afterwards, after 5 years, that becomes mandatory if you want to use your mark in opposition proceedings. So then the opponent, if a request comes from the trademark owner, then the opponent will be required by the office to prove the use of the earlier mark. It can be for all the goods and services, right? He wants to invoke against the trademark application. Now, it can be that the proof of use is only for partial of the goods, then only that part of the goods which has been proven to be used on the market would then qualify for the opposition proceedings, for the comparison of the goods and services. If not, the other part would out. Or nothing has been proved, so the opposition mark is out in full. Now, this is opposition. Let's go to the cancellation proceedings. So a cancellation request can be introduced against the non-use of a trademark for the previous 5 years, so to say. There's more to it, but I will make it simple. And the trademark owner must then prove, in order to maintain the mark on the register, that it had been used. And through all evidence of use, that could be ads, that could be packages, that could be invoices, that could be affidavits, that could be all kind of other documents, retailer, chambers of commerce, declarations, all kind of evidence is possible. There's no limitation of the evidence which can be presented, and the examiner will do its assessment on taking into account all the factors that you see very much in the litigation part, or in the decisions, that everything has to be taken into account. That is rather that each circumstance of each case is different. So therefore, you see often that all kind of circumstances will be taken into account. Now, this is one thing of the non-use. There are different aspects of it that you grasp it, right? Now, the non-use is one thing and the bad faith is another. And I will come to this now with regard to a case of a Croatian company against Hasbro. Hasbro is an American company, a trademark owner of Monopoly. You may have come across that one. That is a game which we, when we were young, were playing a lot, about paper money and so. And it has been owned by Hasbro since a long time. In fact, just from the beginning, from EIPO in 1996, Hasbro made some trademark applications with regard to that, and well, they proceeded to registration afterwards. Now, with the recent, in 2014 or so, Hasbro made a new application, EUIPO application, with regard to a list of goods and services. Some of them have been covered by earlier marks, and others are not. And it proceeded to the registration. Now, at a certain moment, a Croatian company made a cancellation request against Hasbro for bad faith. It alleged that the trademark has been filed in bad faith. And why is that bad faith? Well, they wanted to circumvent the the use requirement during after the grace period. And why is that? Well, they had coverage for monopoly for certain goods and services they applied for now, and they applied again in order not to be confronted in eventual opposition in eventual cancellation cases with the use requirement. Whereas Hasbro said, well, that is not really the case. what we wanted is to take into account the evolution, the technological evolution, and to make a more comprehensive coverage of the goods and services, and that's what we intended to do. Now, this was passed to the Cancellation Division for decision, and they said, well, it is not unusual that refiling has been done after a certain time. This was 14 years here, so that is quite normal to do so. That is a current business practice, and there is no evidence on the intention of circumventing the use requirement. So the creation company was not satisfied with that decision, and it appealed to the Boards of Appeal. Now, the Boards of Appeal, still an administrative instance at the EU IPO, they wanted to make a hearing. So very often, within the appeal proceedings, one of the parties asks for a hearing and is never granted, because once you get into it, you don't know what would be the arguments which have to be presented orally and cannot be presented in written, right? So in this time it was the contrary. It was up to the Boards of Appeal who requested the hearing, and there is a reason behind, because it is about intention. Bad faith is about intention of making a dishonest business practice, etc. So they made a hearing, and in the hearing it was, so to say, the witness from Hasbro, they said, well, we wanted to make some new, to take into account the evolvement of the technology and make some enlarge of the coverage of goods and services, but they recognized as well that it would be an advantage in certain opposition proceedings not to have the necessity to have the administrative burden to prove the use of the mark. So the Boards of Appeal, they concluded to bad faith on more or less this ground. That was the main factor for them, by saying, well, it could be that it is a normal practice to make a repeated filing. So repeated filing as such is not a bad faith issue. But the intention of circumventing proof of use requirement is. And here it was admitted that the administrative burden of use requirement is so to say, a collateral advantage, and that the Hasbro would be able to withdraw afterwards, to withdraw part of the goods and services they would not use and leave with those they would also not use, but they would not be required to the use requirement for the next 5 years. So that was the main issue from the Boards of Appeal, and it was quite a novel argument. It was a brave argument in order to reject so to cancel the Hasbro trademark. Now, Hasbro was not satisfied with this, and it went to the General Court of Justice in Luxembourg. And the General Court went over the different arguments of the parties of Hasbro and the creation company, and they came to the conclusion, well, although it is not prohibited to make repeated trademark filings, but in that case, the witness, they said, well, administrative burden is less if you do not have to prove the use requirement in case it is required by the defendant the defendant in opposition cases. So at the end, the General Court confirmed what has been said by the Boards of Appeal, and, well, there is some new jurisprudence now out there on repeated filings, and that would constitute under EU case law a kind of bad faith. So I put on here in the middle the pages so that you can see, if you want to look up either the cancellation decision, the Boards of Appeal decision, or the General Court ruling, you can look them up in detail. So bad faith is not what you may have expected. When I was in China in the EU delegation, it was about IP and the trademark bad filing in China. That was our main issue with regard from the European perspective, from the European business perspective with regard to China. Well, this is not the cyber squatting here. That is not the main issue we have with regard to bad faith. Bad faith allegations or bad faith cases are rather rare, I would say. We have not many cases. There's Lind Goldhase case and that one, and there are 2 or 3 more. But it is not something we have a lot. But bad faith is something which you are confronted with, and you probably have asked yourself, what happens with bad faith in Europe? It is such a great issue over there, all over the world. And it is maintained as a bad issue from the Europeans, from EU lawyers. Well, it is not such a big deal in Europe itself. Now, let me wrap this up. I'm going a bit long here. It is the cancellation proceedings which admit a lot of grounds to be verified by the cancellation division, which are absolute grounds, which are relative grounds, which is bad faith, which is use requirement, etc. So all of this surrender, this can be all looked up once the registration has been taken place. Only then, after registration, a cancellation request can be filed with. And you know, the proceedings are not very much different than opposition. So you have to pay as a cancellation request, and then the requirements of you have to make a brief, and this is replied by the brief, and you have a replique and a duplique. So that is all the same. You know this already from the opposition division proceedings, which I get in detail. So thanks for tuning in, and thanks for being so long with me.